3 days earlier, my father banned me from New Year's Eve. He said I didn't belong with the family anymore. But at midnight, the world found out who I really was. The phone wouldn't stop vibrating in my hand as I sat alone in that cramped studio apartment, the walls pressing in on me like a coffin. Outside, fireworks exploded in bursts of gold and silver, celebrating a new year I couldn't bring myself to welcome. Across town, in the mansion I used to call home, my family was raising champagne glasses, their laughter echoing through rooms I was no longer allowed to enter. And my father, the man who raised me, the man who looked me in the eye just 72 hours ago and told me I was no longer his daughter, was collapsing in front of a television screen, his face drained of color as the breaking news flashed across every channel. The ticker at the bottom read numbers so large they didn't seem real. My name appeared next to them. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The screen went black for just a moment, and in that darkness, I could see my own reflection, hollow-eyed and trembling. This is the story of how rejection became revolution, how silence became strength, and how the daughter they threw away became the woman they could never ignore. Who was really responsible for what happened that night? Why did the family push her away? What secret had been hidden for years, buried beneath expensive dinners and polite conversations, festering like a wound no one wanted to acknowledge? How did rejection lead to unimaginable success? These questions haunted everyone who heard what happened, but the answers were more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The headlines started appearing within minutes of midnight. Social media exploded with speculation, theories, accusations. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. The phones inside rang and rang and rang, but no one knew what to say. In the empty rooms of that grand house, shadows stretched long across imported marble floors. The financial tickers on every business channel showed the same thing, over and over, the numbers climbing, the analysis frantic, the speculation wild. Phone call transcripts would later reveal the panic, the confusion, the desperate attempts to understand how this could have happened without anyone knowing. Was this success revenge? Or justice? That question would define everything that came after. To understand that night, you have to understand where it all began. My family wasn't just wealthy. They were legacy. Old money, the kind that came with expectations so heavy they could crush you before you even learned to walk. My father built his empire on the foundation his father left him, and his father before that, a dynasty of men in dark suits making decisions behind closed doors. Appearances were everything. Every smile had to be perfect. Every word had to be measured. Every action had to reflect the family name. My brother understood this instinctively. He was golden from birth, the heir apparent, groomed and polished, and presented to the world like a crown jewel. He knew which fork to use at which course. He knew which people to charm and which to dismiss. He moved through our world like he owned it, because one day he would. And then there was me. I never quite fit the mold they tried to force me into. While they talked about quarterly earnings and board meetings, I dreamed about building something new, something that mattered, something that could change the way people lived. I spent my nights in my room with my laptop, teaching myself to code, understanding systems, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. They called it a phase. They called it a hobby. They called it cute. What they never called it was important. My father would look at me across the dinner table with something between disappointment and confusion, like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a problem he didn't have time for. My mother would smooth things over with her practiced smile, changing the subject, redirecting attention, keeping the peace at any cost. My brother barely saw me at all. I was background noise in his perfect life, an inconvenience he tolerated because we shared DNA. The distance grew slowly, so slowly I didn't notice it at first. Decisions were made without consulting me. Plans were changed without telling me. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. I became a ghost in my own home, present but unseen, heard but not listened to. Family photos were taken at angles that somehow always left me slightly out of frame. Holiday cards featured the three of them prominently, with me tucked in the corner like an afterthought. But one decision would change the course of all our lives, and none of us saw it coming. The weeks leading up to New Year's Eve felt different. The annual party was a tradition, a spectacle where the family displayed their wealth and influence to everyone who mattered. Preparations began months in advance, every detail meticulously planned, every guest list revised a dozen times. That year, I noticed my name was missing from the planning emails. When I asked about it, I got vague responses. When I offered to help, I was told they had everything under control. The calls from my mother became shorter, more distant. My brother stopped responding to my messages entirely. My father was always in meetings, always too busy, always somewhere else. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself they were just stressed. I told myself everything would be fine. Then, 3 days before New Year's Eve, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I answered with relief, ready to laugh about the miscommunication, ready to hear about my role in the party, ready to be included again. His voice was cold. Not angry, not emotional, just cold. Professional. Like he was firing an employee he'd never particularly liked. "You're not welcome here tonight," he said. The words didn't make sense at first. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, with the same flat tone, the same clinical delivery. "The family has decided it's best if you don't attend this year. We'll be in touch after the holidays." And then he hung up. Just like that. No explanation. No discussion. No chance to defend myself against accusations I didn't even know had been made. I called back. He didn't answer. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I called my brother. The number was disconnected. In the span of 10 minutes, I had been erased. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of confusion and hurt. I replayed every recent interaction, searching for clues, trying to understand what I had done wrong. Had I offended someone? Had I embarrassed them? Had I failed to meet some expectation I didn't know existed? The questions spiraled endlessly, eating away at me, leaving me hollow. New Year's Eve arrived. I watched the snow fall outside my apartment window, each flake drifting down like a small defeat. In the distance, I could hear celebrations, people counting down, people kissing, people welcoming the future with hope and joy. I sat in the dark, my phone silent, my heart breaking in ways I didn't know hearts could break. And then the clock struck midnight. If you're still watching at this point, type "I'm still here," or tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see who's following the story this far. The first notification came at 12:01 a.m. Then another. Then 10. Then hundreds. My phone began to vibrate so violently it fell off the table. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of the traffic. News websites scrambled to verify information. Financial analysts were pulled from their own celebrations to explain what was happening. And across town, in the mansion where champagne still bubbled in crystal glasses, where guests still mingled in designer clothes, where everything was supposed to be perfect, my father stood frozen in front of the television, his hand clutching his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. My mother rushed to his side, her practiced composure finally cracking. My brother stared at the screen in disbelief, his face a mask of confusion and something else, something that looked like fear. The breaking news was simple but devastating. A new technology had just been announced. A patent filed. A company launched. A valuation reached that made headlines around the world. And my name was attached to all of it. The phone started ringing immediately. Investors, reporters, competitors, friends who hadn't called in years suddenly needed to talk right now. The family's carefully maintained image crumbled in real time as every guest at the party pulled out their phones and saw the same news, made the same connections, asked the same questions. How long had this been in development? How had no one known? How had the family not been involved? The whispers started before the fireworks even finished. By morning, the story had gone global. But the question everyone was asking was the same one that haunted me as I sat in my apartment, watching my life explode across every screen. How did this happen? The truth was complicated, layered, built over years of quiet work and careful planning. 3 years earlier, I had started something. Not as revenge, not even as ambition at first, just as survival. I needed something that was mine, something they couldn't take away, something that proved I was more than the disappointment they saw when they looked at me. I began with an idea, a simple observation about how people interacted with technology, how systems could be improved, how efficiency could be maximized. I taught myself advanced programming. I studied market gaps. I analyzed patents and identified opportunities. I worked 16-hour days while maintaining the appearance of the dutiful daughter, showing up for family dinners with a smile, attending required events without complaint, never letting them see how hard I was working, how seriously I was taking this thing they considered a hobby. I filed the initial patents under a shell company, using legal structures that kept my name hidden. I brought in advisors who understood discretion. I found investors who valued innovation over pedigree. Slowly, carefully, methodically, I built something real. The technology was revolutionary, a new approach to artificial intelligence integration that solved problems every major company was facing. The applications were endless. The market potential was massive. And I owned it all. But success doesn't come without enemies, especially when family is involved. 6 months before New Year's Eve, my brother found something. A document, an email, some trace of what I was building. He didn't confront me. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he went to my father with a proposal. They could take the technology. They could claim it was developed using family resources, family connections, family money. They could fold it into the family business and pretend I had been working for them all along. The IP theft was carefully planned. Lawyers were consulted. Backdated documents were prepared. Contracts were forged with my signature. They were going to steal everything I had built and leave me with nothing, not even the credit for my own work. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed I was still the naive daughter they had always underestimated. They assumed I hadn't protected myself. They assumed wrong. Every email was recorded. Every conversation was documented. Every attempt to access my files was logged. I had evidence of everything, time-stamped and backed up in multiple secure locations. I knew what they were planning before they finalized their strategy. I knew they would try to push me out before they made their move. I knew the New Year's Eve rejection was the first step in a larger plan to erase me from my own story. So, I accelerated my timeline. I moved up the launch. I went public before they could stop me. And I made sure the world knew exactly who had created what they were seeing. The patent office records were clear. The development timeline was documented. The ownership was indisputable. And the evidence of attempted theft was quietly filed with authorities, a safety net I hoped I would never need to use. The technology launched at midnight on New Year's Eve, timed perfectly to maximize impact, to ensure every news outlet would cover it, to make sure my name would be attached to success so publicly that it could never be taken away. The valuation hit $1 billion in the first hour. The stock price climbed so fast trading was temporarily halted. By morning, I was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, and my family was scrambling to understand what had just happened. But the truth wasn't on Wall Street. It was buried inside the family, in years of dismissal and disappointment, in the cold distance of a father who never believed in me, in the calculated cruelty of a brother who saw me as competition rather than kin, in the silent complicity of a mother who chose peace over protection. The truth was that they had created their own destruction, that their need to control had blinded them to what was happening right in front of them, that their arrogance had cost them everything they thought they were entitled to. In the days that followed, the full story emerged. Investigative journalists started digging. The attempted IP theft was exposed. The forged documents were discovered. The family's lawyers released carefully worded statements that convinced no one. My brother's involvement became public knowledge, his reputation in the business community destroyed overnight. My father, who had built his entire identity on control and legacy, faced questions he couldn't answer and scrutiny he couldn't escape. The mansion that had been my prison became theirs, surrounded by reporters and gawkers, their privacy violated in ways they had never imagined possible. My mother, who had spent her life maintaining appearances, watched helplessly as everything she had worked to build crumbled around her. The phone calls started coming to me. Apologies. Explanations. Justifications. My mother cried and said she didn't know the full extent of what they were planning. My brother blamed my father for leading him astray. My father said nothing at all, his pride too strong to bend even as his empire shook. I listened to their messages. I read their emails. I felt the weight of their regret and their desperation. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just exhaustion. Because winning didn't feel like I thought it would. Success didn't heal the wounds they had inflicted. Money didn't erase the memory of that phone call, of my father's cold voice telling me I wasn't welcome, of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The technology one had created was changing industries, solving problems, making the world more efficient. The company I had built was hiring thousands of people, creating opportunities, driving innovation. The wealth I had accumulated gave me freedom I had never known. But at night, in my apartment that I could now afford to leave but somehow couldn't, I still felt like that ghost in the family photos, present but unseen, heard but not listened to. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. The evidence was overwhelming. The attempted theft was proven beyond doubt. Settlements were reached. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. The family business took a hit it would never fully recover from, their reputation tarnished, their influence diminished, their name associated with scandal rather than success. But just when everyone thought the story was over, something unexpected happened. My mother showed up at my door. Not with lawyers. Not with cameras. Just her, alone, looking smaller than I remembered, older than I had noticed. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood in the hallway and said she needed to tell me something. The truth, she said, was more complicated than anyone knew. My father had known about my project from the beginning. He had seen the patent filings, recognized my name despite the shell company, understood what I was building. And he had been terrified, not of my success, but of what it meant. His entire identity was built on being the patriarch, the provider, the source of the family's wealth and power. The idea that his daughter could surpass him, could achieve something he never had, could become more successful than the entire family legacy combined, threatened the foundation of who he believed himself to be. So, he convinced himself that I must have stolen the idea, that I must have used family resources, that I must have had help I wasn't acknowledging. He couldn't accept that I had done it alone, that I was capable of something he couldn't control, that I didn't need him. The plan to take the technology wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting the narrative, about maintaining his position as the center of the family's success, about ensuring that even my achievements were ultimately attributed to him. And the rejection at New Year's Eve wasn't cruelty. It was cowardice. He couldn't face me knowing what he was about to do. He couldn't look me in the eye and pretend everything was normal while planning to destroy me. So, he pushed me away before I could see the truth in his face. My mother had known pieces of this. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel guilty. Enough to realize she should have said something. Enough to understand that her silence had been a choice, and she had chosen wrong. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She just wanted me to know that my father's cruelty came from fear, not hate. That his rejection came from insecurity, not indifference. That in his twisted way, he had seen my potential all along, and it had terrified him. I stood there in my doorway, looking at this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to smile through pain, who had shown me how to survive in a family that didn't understand me. And I realized that she was still doing it, still trying to smooth things over, still trying to make the pain mean something other than what it was. I asked her why she was telling me this. What did it matter what he felt or feared? What did it matter if his cruelty had an explanation? Did knowing the reason make the wound any less deep? She didn't have an answer for that. She just looked at me with eyes that held decades of compromises and sacrifices and small betrayals committed in the name of peace. And then she left. I never saw her again. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. This wasn't the silence of rejection. This was the silence of boundary, of distance chosen rather than imposed, of finally having the power to decide who was allowed in my life and who had lost that privilege forever. The company continued to grow. The technology was licensed to major corporations around the world. New patents were filed. New innovations were developed. The team I built was brilliant, passionate, driven by the work itself rather than legacy or ego or proving anything to anyone. I moved into a new place, larger, but somehow warmer than the apartment where everything had changed. I created spaces that felt like mine, filled with things I loved rather than things I was supposed to love, decorated in ways that pleased me rather than ways that impressed others. I started sleeping better. The notifications still came, but they no longer made my heart race. The headlines still mentioned my name, but I no longer obsessed over what they said. The wealth that had seemed surreal became simply a tool, a means to build the life I wanted rather than an end in itself. But the family was never far from my thoughts. I heard through intermediaries that my father had retired, that his health had declined, that he spent his days in the mansion surrounded by reminders of past glory. I heard that my brother had moved abroad, trying to rebuild a reputation that would forever be tainted by scandal. I heard that my mother had become involved in charity work, trying perhaps to balance some cosmic scale of right and wrong. And I felt a complicated mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction. Not quite forgiveness. Something stranger, something that acknowledged both the pain they caused and the strength that pain had forged, something that understood I would not be who I was without them, for better and worse. Years passed. The story faded from headlines. New scandals emerged. New billionaires were minted. The world moved on the way it always does, fascinated by novelty, bored by resolution, hungry for the next drama. But I carried the story with me, not as a wound but as a map, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come, a testament to the price of underestimation and the power of persistence, a complicated truth about family and loyalty and the fine line between protecting someone and controlling them. I learned that success doesn't heal trauma, that money doesn't fix broken relationships, that vindication doesn't erase the ache of rejection. But I also learned that I was stronger than I knew, that I was capable of more than anyone believed, that I could build something meaningful from nothing, could survive betrayal and rejection, and come out the other side whole, that I didn't need their approval to be proud of myself, that I didn't need their love to be worthy of love, that I didn't need their acceptance to accept myself, and that, perhaps, was the real victory. Not the $1 billion, not the headlines, not the satisfaction of watching them face consequences. The victory was in becoming someone I respected, someone I believed in, someone who didn't need external validation to know her own worth. The victory was in understanding that the greatest revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was proving myself right. Sometimes late at night, I wondered what would have happened if they had believed in me from the start. If my father had encouraged my work instead of dismissing it. If my brother had seen me as an ally instead of a threat. If my mother had spoken up instead of staying silent. Would I have built something even greater with their support? Or did I need the rejection to find the strength I didn't know I had? There was no way to know. No alternate timeline to compare against. Just the reality I lived in, complicated and painful, and ultimately mine. I thought about my father sometimes, wondered if he understood what he had lost. Not just money or reputation, but the chance to be part of something extraordinary. The chance to watch his daughter change the world and be proud rather than threatened. The chance to be remembered for supporting innovation rather than trying to steal it. I thought about my brother, wondered if he regretted following our father's lead, if he understood that his own insecurity had cost him more than my success ever could have. I thought about my mother, wondered if she laid awake at night replaying moments where she could have chosen differently, could have protected me, could have been the parent I needed instead of the peacekeeper she thought the family needed. But mostly I thought about myself. About the girl who sat in her childhood home feeling invisible. About the young woman who coded through the night fueled by nothing but stubborn determination. About the entrepreneur who protected her work with paranoid precision because she knew her family couldn't be trusted. About the billionaire who stood in her apartment on New Year's Eve, watching her life explode across every screen, feeling more alone than she had ever felt before. And I thought about who I had become after all of it. Someone who built companies that solved problems. Someone who hired talented people and trusted them. Someone who understood that true power came not from controlling others, but from empowering them. Someone who knew that family wasn't about blood, but about who showed up, who supported you, who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. I built a new family. Not in the traditional sense, but in the ways that mattered. My team became my community. My mentors became my guides. My friends became my foundation. And slowly, carefully, I learned to trust again. To let people in. To believe that not everyone would betray me, that not every relationship was transactional, that not every person would see my success as a threat. The scars remained. I was more cautious than I might have been. More guarded. More aware of power dynamics and hidden agendas. But I was also more grateful for genuine connection, more appreciative of honest support, more protective of the people who stood by me. The documentary cruise came eventually. Everyone wanted to tell the story of the billionaire betrayed by her family. The perfect narrative of triumph over adversity, of the underdog who refused to stay down, of justice served cold on New Year's Eve. I declined most interviews. I didn't need to relive the pain for public consumption. I didn't need to turn my trauma into entertainment. I didn't need the validation of millions of strangers to know my story mattered. But occasionally I would speak. Usually to young people, especially young women, who felt underestimated, dismissed, invisible in their own lives. I would tell them about the importance of protecting your work, of documenting everything, of building systems that couldn't be taken away. I would tell them that success was possible even when no one believed in you, especially when no one believed in you, because the only belief that truly mattered was your own. I would tell them that family rejection hurt, that the pain was real, that they were allowed to grieve what they lost even if what they lost was toxic. But I would also tell them that pain could be transformed, that wounds could become wisdom, that the strength forged in darkness was the kind that never broke. And I would tell them the truth that took me years to learn. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making them regret what they did. It's building a life so fulfilling that you forget to care whether they regret it or not. Do you think the father was wrong? Or was he trying to protect something? Was justice really served? What would you have done in this situation? These questions don't have simple answers. Life rarely does. My father was both wrong and afraid. Justice was both served and incomplete. And what I did was survive, which is sometimes the only option available, and build, which is sometimes the best revenge. The story doesn't have a neat ending because real stories rarely do. There was no tearful reunion. No moment where my father admitted his mistakes and asked for forgiveness. No family gathering where everything was resolved and love conquered all. Instead, there was distance, silence, the slow acceptance that some relationships can't be repaired, that some betrayals are too fundamental, that some families are better loved from far away or not at all. Instead, there was growth, evolution, the gradual understanding that I didn't need their validation to be successful, their love to be lovable, their acceptance to accept myself. Instead, there was peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not forgetting what happened, but refusing to let it define me. Not forgiving because they earned it, but releasing because I deserved freedom. Years later, I received a letter. No return address. My mother's handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. You were always stronger than we knew, and that was our failure, not yours. I never responded. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said through actions and consequences and the years of silence between us. But I kept the letter, not as vindication, not as closure, just as acknowledgement. A small admission that maybe, in the end, someone understood what they had done, what they had lost, what they had failed to see until it was too late. And maybe that was enough. Not everything. Not resolution. But enough. The business continued to evolve. New challenges emerged. Market conditions changed. Competition increased. Success, it turned out, required constant innovation, constant adaptation, constant work. But I was built for that. Forged by people who underestimated me. Shaped by rejection that taught me to believe in myself. Strengthened by betrayal that showed me who I really was. On New Year's Eve, years after that night that changed everything, I stood in my office overlooking the city. Below, fireworks were preparing to launch. Around me, my team celebrated another successful year. Beside me, friends who had become family raised glasses in toast. And I thought about that girl in the apartment, alone and heartbroken, and watching her world explode across every screen. I thought about her fear and her pain and her determination. And I wished I could tell her it would be okay, that she would survive, that she would build something extraordinary, that she would find her people, that she would be proud of who she became. But she wouldn't have believed me anyway. She had to walk the path herself, had to feel the pain to know she could survive it, had to face the rejection to discover her own worth, had to lose everything to understand what really mattered. The clock struck midnight. The city erupted in light and sound. My friends cheered and hugged and welcomed the new year with hope and joy. And I smiled, not because I had beaten my family, not because I was wealthy beyond measure, not because the world knew my name, but because I was standing in a room full of people who believed in me, doing work that mattered to me, living a life that was authentically mine. Because I had taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into the catalyst for the best thing I ever built. Because I had proven that rejection wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And if you thought this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in the next one. Subscribe for more real-life, twisted family stories. Like and share if this kept you watching. Comment your thoughts. I read every single one. Sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming the person they said you never could. Sometimes it's building a life they can't touch. Sometimes it's simply surviving when they expected you to break. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's all three at once.